Hello, I'm glad that you could join me today for this new video where I wanted to talk about most of what I've read in 2024. So let's start it with Tolkien. So I've read a fair few of Tolkien last year, and starting with The Hobbit. So it's only the second time that I've read it. The first time around was around maybe a decade ago, right after the movies came out, and I liked it, but it wasn't like a huge, I don't know, crush or love at first sight like with The Lord of the Rings. I thought it was maybe a little bit underwhelming after the movies, despite all the criticisms that we can have about them. I think at the time I thought they were engaging, but I was a little bit disappointed in the book. And I know that's blasphemy for most people. So that's why I wanted to give it another go. And I did, and I absolutely adored it. It's obviously 10 times better than the movies, even though I think the first one still holds up fairly well. And I've read it with this edition by Alan Lee. I know most of you will be familiar with this one. It's a very nice one. It's very beautiful. There is the famous map here. And if you remove the dust jacket, it's still a fairly decent edition. Look, this book, the gold inscription there. It's a very nice book. I like it. There aren't that many illustrations inside, to be honest, but those that are present are very nice. I gotta admit, I'm not fed up with Alan Lee's illustrations like some people tend to be. I still love them. So great experience. I loved reading The Hobbit, and I will definitely read it again soon. So staying with Tolkien, I also wanted to expand on Middle Earth, and I've read for the first time The Children of Húrin, that you can see here in this edition. And I get to say it's one of my favorite reads of the year. It's absolutely amazing, but it's very dark and bleak indeed. That's probably the darkest thing Tolkien has ever written or ever wrote. I had already read that story in the Silmarillion, but it was the first time in the Christopher Tolkien edited version, which is like I think 5 times longer than the one in the Silmarillion. So it's really worth picking. And there are also Alan Lee illustrations, as you can see here, for example. It's very nice. I really enjoyed it. It feels more like maybe a Greek tragedy than a typical fantasy, but it's great. Absolutely amazing. One of my favorite reads of the year. And then I wanted to dive deeper into Tolkien's catalog and go out of Middle Earth. So that's why I've read some of his children's stories. As you can see here, I've got a nice box set like this. So it's very nice with Pauline Bain's illustrations. They're also very beautiful. And I started with Smith of Wootton Major. It's an incredible story, fairly short. I think I read it in 2 sittings, so it's quite short, but it's absolutely lovely. It's about this kid who grows up, still very young, and goes to fairyland and back into his own town of Wootton Major. It's very whimsical, it's funny, it's beautiful and poetic, so I would highly recommend it. It's also one of my favorite Tolkien stories, probably my favorite one outside of Middle Earth. It's great, and it's a low commitment. You can, as I said, you can read it in 2 sittings. Low commitment, absolutely great. And then I jumped into Farmer Giles of Ham. So this one was on my radar for a long time, because when I was reading Tolkien's letters back in the day, I realized how important this story was to him. He tried to get it published for a long time, and it wasn't easy. And that was before Lord of the Rings got published, and his publisher wanted something to publish. And Tolkien tried to publish this one, but it took a long time, and I'm not sure it was a huge success. But it's quite nice. I didn't enjoy it as much as Smith of Wootton Major. I think mostly because of the main character, Farmer Giles, who at first is not as likable as the character in Smith of Wootton Major, but it's still very, very nice, and you can see also Pauline Bain's illustrations that are great. Here is a map, like you have to in Tolkien's. So quite nice. I also recommend it. It's a bit longer than Smith of Wootton Major, but I think it's like maybe 150 pages, so it's not that huge a commitment, and it's fairly easy to read. It's quite nice. I would recommend it if you want to go outside of Middle Earth. Now, I tried reading Rather Random, and it's the second time that I've tried, but I didn't go very far, as you can see here, maybe a third of the book, because this one is very much child-oriented, and that is for, I don't know, 5-year-olds maybe. And as an adult, I kind of struggle with this a little bit. I will get it done in 2025 at some point, but it's very poetic and whimsical, but a bit too childish maybe for me. So yeah, let me know if you have read it and what you think about it. Now, I've also read The Return of the King out of this version. So I have several editions of the Lord of the Rings, and this is an old one from the 80s. I thought was interesting, even though you can see the title is not very well centered or aligned with the rest, but it's a nice one. It had been a while since I read The Return of the King, because I read The Fellowship many times, but I kind of always want to start over and never finish it. So yeah, it had been a few years, and I did it this last year. I'm happy about that. And also I've read Leaf by Nigel. So out of this edition here, I don't know if I can find it, but out of this edition here, which is also a nice one, illustrated by Alan Lee. It's always a gauge of quality. Okay, and yeah, so Leaf by Nigel is the most autobiographical story that Tolkien ever wrote. It's really about him. Nigel is him, and it's one that I would highly recommend because it's very short, so it's going to take you less than an hour to read it, and it's a great insight into how Tolkien viewed his life and his work. It's delightful, very, very, and insightful as well, so highly recommend it. Great reads. So yeah, Tolkien was a big part of what I read in 2024, and I enjoyed, as I said, everything was very, very good. Now, the next big author for 2024 for me was C.S. Lewis, but I've read most of his books that I've read was on Kindle, so I don't have a physical copy of them, unfortunately, but I've read the whole Narnia, and I really, really enjoyed them. I think my favorite was The Voyage of the Dawn Treader or The Silver Chair. I mean, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is also very, very good, and if that's your favorite, I definitely understand. But I would have to say book 3 or 4, they're probably my two favorites. And I've also read Mere Christianity, but that's a bit different, it's not a novel, of course. And I intend to continue reading C.S. Lewis in 2025, but that will be more detailed in another video. Outside of Lewis, I also read quite a bit of Chesterton. So I've read The Man Who Was Thursday, and probably his most famous novel, and then The Napoleon of Notting Hill, which was his first novel, And I will make a video about the Napoleon of Notting Hill fairly soon, but I still need to gather my thoughts a little bit, because it's quite tricky. It's not an easy read, so I have to work things out a little bit more before I can make a video about it. And then I've read a lot of Father Brown stories, and I gotta say that's one of my favorite reads of the year, because I think they're very delightful. And one of my favorite was probably The Eye of Apollo. That's a great one. I highly recommend it. The only criticism I have about those stories is that sometimes Father Brown is barely in them. There's a lot of setup and new characters and things like that, and then Father Brown comes at the end and kind of solves the investigation and saves the day. But I want more of Father Brown. You know, he's the main character, obviously, so I want more of him. Now, I understand what Chesterton was doing there, because Father Brown is a kind of very humble person. He doesn't want to be at the forefront. He's not interested in being the main guy, all that. So that's part of his personality that is reflected in the story and how it's constructed. But sometimes it's still a bit lacking of him, in my opinion. But otherwise, great stories, and highly recommend them as well. And then I also read some medieval literature. So I don't have everything I've read here, because I've read a lot of poetry in various anthologies and things like that, so it will be tough to show you everything. But the two main ones were Chrétien de Troyes, or Christian of Troy in English, so who wrote Arthurian romances, and he's the first to introduce the Grail. And it's very interesting. I had actually owned this book for a long time. I bought it when I was 16, I think, but never really got to it because it was a bit tough, and I don't know, maybe I was too young. But I've read it in the summer, and I absolutely loved it. It was great. So there are 5 different stories about Knights of the Round Table, and the last one about Percival is unfinished, unfortunately, and that's the one involving the Grail, so it's very frustrating. But it's still very interesting. I enjoyed it, and as I said, Chrétien de Troyes introduced the Grail in Arthurian legends, and at his time, the Grail was just a plate. That's what it means in Latin. Grailus is a plate, you know, like this, and then it's later then it's turned into a cup that was used, or a vase that was used to collect the blood of Jesus. And that's what you see in this book that I've read, The Quest for the Holy Grail. So this one is a 13th century anonymous novel. Yeah, so we don't know who wrote it. Chrétien de Troyes is 12th century, so it's at the peak of the courteous love, fin amour, as it was called at the time. This one is a century later, and it's good. I enjoyed it. It's not a thin book, but it's very much, how would you say, like Christian heavy, which doesn't necessarily bother me, but sometimes it feels like a Bible study for dummies, a little bit, and so yeah, not my favorite read of the year, but still worth reading, I think. And then after medieval literature, I had a bit of a Tolstoï kick. So I've read, you can see some short stories of this book, and so yeah, and I have a nice picture of him from this book. So my favorite short stories were The Death of Ivan Illich. That's probably his most famous. It's a very good one. I enjoy them. Now it's about death and someone regretting his life choices, but it's not a very fun read, of course, but it's interesting. And I started War and Peace. So it's divided into 4 books, and I've read the first one, I'm not very far in, as you can see from my notes. But it's very interesting. I like it. I'm not a huge fan of Napoleonic Wars, but I think it's still a very good novel. I will continue reading it in 2025. And the last thing that I wanted to show was this picture book, or this book of photographs of Tolstoy's life that his wife took. It's a great book. There's a lot about his life and what he was doing at various times, of course. And you can see his house and the forest behind it. It's quite pretty, quite beautiful book. Oh yes, here is Tolstoy himself. Looks very much like a Russian version of an angry Merlin. So yeah, I will definitely keep reading Tolstoy next year. Probably War and Peace. I would like to get to Anna Karenina at some point, but I don't know when. Let's see, just here. You can see very nice pictures. I enjoyed them. She was a good photographer, I think. Sophia Tolstoy. So yeah, so that's basically everything I've read in 2024, or most of what I read. Oh, there was one that I wanted to add that I don't have a physical copy for, and that's The Haunted Bookshop by Christopher Morley. And I gotta say that one was one of my favorite reads of the year. It's really a love letter to secondhand bookshops and books in general, literature, and also an ode to pipe smoking. So for anyone who enjoys those things, I highly recommend The Haunted Bookshop. It's really great, especially the 2/3 of the book, the first 2/3. I think the last third you get more into the plot and the investigation and so on, and so it's nice, but it's not as interesting as the first part, let's say. But it's still great. I love it, and I will definitely read it again. So let me know if you have read any of those books and what you think about them. Thank you, and see you next time.